In our final look at Book 6, I want to examine closely the relationship between Hector and Andromache and their son, Astyanax. In this scene, Hector goes back behind the walls of Troy to ask the Trojan women if they will please bring to Athena's altar sacrifices and pray to Athena that the Trojans might have victory and success in the war. Andromache, Hector's wife, has been pacing the walls like a mad woman, looking for signs of Hector, looking to see what Hector's up to. She is very concerned about Hector. And in this beautiful scene, we get to see why that is. Not only because, of course, she loves him and there is a faithful marriage here being depicted, but also there's a greater context that she reveals to the listener as they're paying attention to the scene. You have, throughout history, this scene has been depicted in art. It has been re-examined over and over again as a beautiful and honest look at a family. Andromache comes to Hector bearing their child, who is actually being held by a maid. So you see in the middle image there that the maid is holding on to the baby, who maybe at this point is less than a year old. And Andromache comes to Hector and begs him not to go back to war. The reasons that she reveals to the listeners is that her 7 brothers have died in war. Her mother, her father, she has lost everyone and only has Hector left. So not only does she love her husband, but she calls her husband her mother, her father, her husband too, that he is everything to her, and begs him not to go fight. She's afraid that he will die and she will be left without anyone. Hector responds, I too have felt this fear. I too have worried that I am not fated to return home to you. And yet it would be shameful for me to not continue fighting. He says that I have learned to be valiant. I have learned to be brave in the course of fighting this war over the last 9 years. I have moved to the front of the charge. The Trojans look to me. We also discover later that most of his brothers have already been killed in the war, that a lot of the sons of Priam have died in the same way that Andromache's brothers have died, many of them slain by Achilles himself, and that Hector realizes this could be his fate. What we see is another possibility that he could be fated to return victorious. And we have this moment in which either one of those possibilities seem plausible to Hector. For those of us listening to his response to Andromache, especially ancient readers who would have been contemporary with Homer, they already know that Hector will die. But Hector here does not seem to be aware of that fate. He thinks it could go either way. The listeners would have known that Hector was not to return. When Hector speaks to Andromache, he says, I worry too that this may be my fate, the fate that you speak of. What I worry about the most is that you will be dragged off by the Achaeans and that you will be made into their slave, and that they will mock you as being the wife of Hector, who was once the breaker of horses and of course now is dead. He worries about this fate for her, and the contemporary listeners of Homer's poem would have known this was her fate. This was what happens to Andromache after the war, after Troy falls. Andromache is taken away as a slave. Also, Astyanax, Hector lifts up the baby. There's a very heartwarming scene, and it's depicted here in which the baby is running from Hector in the middle because of Hector's famous glittering helmet with the horse hair on the top. And Hector takes the helmet off. He and his wife laugh at the fear of the baby. He takes off the helmet and picks up the baby, and then he prays to Zeus. So you see the image on the left, his eyes are up, looking at Zeus, asking, perhaps this baby will be greater than his father. Zeus, will it to be so that this baby will outlive me and become a greater warrior? Of course, the people listening would have known that this baby, Astyanax, would have been thrown from the roofs of Troy after Troy falls. And in many different myths, it's actually Achilles' son who takes the baby and throws him off the walls of Troy. A hideous image and unnecessary violence. So this final scene in book 6 between this family, this depiction of what it is that Hector is fighting for. He is not fighting like Menelaus and Agamemnon and the rest of the Greeks for Time. He's not just fighting for Kleos. He doesn't want to fight. If it was up to him, he would stay home with his family. He's fighting because he has a responsibility to the other Trojans who are having to fight. And he has a responsibility to his family to take care of them. Because if he doesn't fight, then it will be for sure that Astyanax will die, and then Andromache will be taken into slavery. So he must fight to prevent those things, and yet the audience knows he will be unable in the end to prevent them.